She woke up to another morning where the silence of her home felt louder than anything else. Her husband had already left for work, as always, before dawn, and she was left to sip her tea in an empty kitchen. The days felt long, drawn out, and repetitive, filled with chores and waiting for evenings that no longer carried warmth. She told herself she was content, that marriage was about stability more than passion, but deep down a part of her longed for someone to truly notice her, to see her not as a wife maintaining a household but as a woman who still wanted to feel desired. It was during one of those long afternoons that she noticed him again, her neighbor across the street. He was about her age, perhaps a little older, a man who carried himself with quiet dignity but also a hint of solitude. His wife was gone, people whispered about it but never said much, and he lived alone, keeping mostly to himself. Yet whenever they crossed paths, he always offered her a kind smile, one that lingered long enough to make her heartbeat stumble. At first, it felt harmless, polite exchanges over the fence, short greetings when she watered her plants. But slowly, without either of them intending it, those exchanges grew into something more. One afternoon he offered to carry her heavy grocery bags when he saw her struggling. She thanked him, laughing nervously when their hands brushed for a brief moment as he passed her the last bag. It was nothing, she told herself, just a neighbor helping out. Yet later that night when she lay in bed, she caught herself replaying that moment, the simple feel of his hand grazing hers. The thought unsettled her, and yet, she did not push it away. The days continued with more of these small gestures. He waved when she looked out the window, he asked about her day when they met at the mailbox, and sometimes he lingered just a little longer in conversation than necessary. What struck her most was his attentiveness. He listened, really listened, in a way her husband had stopped doing years ago. She would mention something as trivial as her favorite flowers, and a week later he would remember and ask about them. That kind of care, subtle yet deliberate, made her feel seen in a way she hadn't in years. One particular moment etched itself in her mind. It was a late afternoon, the sun setting low, painting the street in amber light. She stood by her gate, and he walked over, leaning casually against the fence. They spoke about nothing and everything: weather, errands, books they used to read. The conversation flowed so naturally that when their eyes met and held for a fraction too long, she felt her breath catch. In that instant, the world around her seemed to fade, leaving only the undeniable current between them. She looked away quickly, guilt already wrapping around her, but her heart betrayed her, racing with a rush she hadn't felt in years. She tried to reason with herself, reminding her heart of loyalty, of vows, of the life she had chosen. Yet every time she caught sight of him, his steady presence, his thoughtful words, something inside her betrayed her resolve. She had not sought this attention, but now that it was there, she could not pretend she did not crave it. She began to look forward to those small interactions, to the possibility of seeing him even for a brief exchange. It was dangerous, she knew, but it also made her feel alive again. By the end of that week, she realized she had started dressing with more care than usual, fixing her hair a little differently, adding a hint of color to her lips even though she told herself it was just for her own confidence. But when she caught him noticing, when she saw his eyes linger ever so subtly before he smiled at her, she knew deep down the truth she wasn't ready to say aloud. What was unfolding between them was no longer just casual neighborly warmth. It was something more, something waiting for the right moment to slip past the boundaries she had always thought unshakable. Her husband's absence became a rhythm, a predictable void she no longer questioned. Long hours at the office, sudden business trips, late nights filled with excuses she stopped challenging. It left her with a home that looked complete from the outside but felt hollow on the inside. Into that emptiness, her neighbor's presence seeped slowly, filling spaces she didn't even realize were aching. She told herself it was harmless, companionship, kindness, a bit of conversation to make the afternoons less lonely. But even she knew the way her heart quickened when she saw him approach was not so innocent. One evening, she found herself lingering outside longer than usual, trimming plants that didn't need trimming, waiting for the chance that he might walk over. When he did, their conversation started light as always, but this time it didn't end quickly. He asked her about her childhood, her dreams before she married, the things that made her smile once upon a time. Nobody had asked her questions like that in years, and when she answered, she felt the weight of his attention fully on her, warm and steady. She caught herself smiling wider than she intended, laughing softly at his small jokes, and realizing how easy it was to open up to him. Their exchanges grew longer. A week later he stopped by to fix the squeaky hinge on her gate, and when he finished, they sat on the porch drinking tea. The setting sun cast soft light on his face, and she noticed the lines of loneliness etched into him, mirroring her own. For a moment, silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable, it was charged. She felt his eyes settle on her, not just as a neighbor, not just as someone passing time, but as a man who saw her, really saw her. Her pulse quickened, and she forced herself to look away, her fingers tightening around the cup in her hands. The next day she tried to pull back, avoiding the porch, closing the curtains, distracting herself with chores. But the more she tried to resist, the more restless she felt. She realized she wanted to hear his voice, to see his smile, to feel the way his attention wrapped around her like a secret only they shared. It was as though a seed had been planted and no amount of willpower could stop it from growing. When they met again, it happened naturally. He reached out, brushing dust from her sleeve as they stood close, and instead of stepping back she froze, aware of how deliberate his touch felt. It was brief, innocent to anyone watching, but in her chest the impact was overwhelming. She should have pulled away, she should have made an excuse, but instead she looked up at him, their eyes locking for a heartbeat too long. He said nothing, and neither did she, yet in that silence something dangerous passed between them, something both of them understood. That night, lying in bed, she thought of that moment again and again. She imagined the way his hand lingered, the weight of his gaze, the warmth that spread through her when he stood so close. She turned away from her husband's sleeping figure beside her, guilt pressing down like a stone, but another part of her stirred with anticipation. She could no longer deny that the line between them was thinning, fraying, ready to snap at the slightest pull. And deep down, though she told herself she would resist, another voice whispered that resistance was already slipping away. The weekend arrived with her husband gone on yet another trip, and the emptiness of the house felt heavier than usual. She tried to fill the time with chores, television, even a book she hadn't finished, but nothing held her attention. Her thoughts drifted inevitably toward him, the man across the street who had begun to occupy her mind more than she dared admit. As evening settled, she heard a knock at the door. When she opened it, there he stood, holding a small basket of fruit from his garden, a simple gesture wrapped in quiet meaning. She invited him in without thinking, her pulse racing at the realization of what she was doing. The two of them sat at the kitchen table, the conversation flowing effortlessly at first, filled with laughter and stories. But the air thickened with every passing minute, the pauses between words lingering longer, their eyes locking with an intensity that left no room for denial. He leaned forward slightly, his voice lower, his tone more personal, and she felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cool evening breeze drifting through the open window. When she reached across the table to take the basket, their fingers brushed. It could have been nothing, an accidental touch, but neither of them pulled away. Instead, her hand remained against his, trembling with the weight of the choice before her. His gaze searched hers, silently asking a question she already knew the answer to. Slowly, almost hesitantly, his fingers curled around hers, and that single motion shattered the fragile wall of restraint they had built. Her heart pounded as she rose from her chair, every step a battle between guilt and desire. He stood too, close now, so close she could feel the warmth radiating off him. For a moment, they just stared at each other, caught in the pull of something undeniable. Then he lifted his hand to her face, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek, his touch soft but deliberate. She closed her eyes, leaning into the contact, surrendering to the storm building inside her. The first kiss was hesitant, almost testing, but the instant their lips met, restraint dissolved into urgency. She clutched his shirt, pulling him closer, while his arms wrapped around her, steady and strong. The world outside ceased to exist. There was only this forbidden closeness, this rush of passion that had been simmering for weeks. The guilt flickered at the edges of her mind, but it was drowned by the thrill of finally feeling alive, wanted, desired in a way she had forgotten was possible. They moved together with unspoken understanding, their actions fueled not by impulse alone but by weeks of suppressed longing. Every touch, every sigh carried the weight of choices they knew could not be undone. The sweetness of his attention, the raw hunger in his embrace, the way he whispered her name, it all consumed her. She was aware that this was betrayal, that it was wrong, but in that moment, wrong felt irresistible, intoxicating. When it was over, they remained close, breaths mingling, silence stretching between them. Her chest heaved as she tried to steady herself, torn between the rush of fulfillment and the ache of guilt pressing against her ribs. She couldn't meet his eyes, afraid of what she might see, regret, or worse, the reflection of her own. But when he reached for her hand, holding it gently, she realized the line they had crossed could never be redrawn. And though part of her wished she could rewind the night, another part of her knew she wouldn't change it. The hours that followed passed in a haze, the house wrapped in a silence that was anything but ordinary. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her body still humming with the memory of his touch, her mind racing with everything it meant. The bed felt different, the air felt different, even the shadows on the walls seemed to press closer, as if they too knew her secret. She turned on her side, watching him as he quietly buttoned his shirt, his movements slow, thoughtful, almost reluctant. Neither of them spoke at first, the weight of what had happened heavy between them. When their eyes finally met, she saw not regret but the same conflict mirrored in his expression. He looked at her as though he wanted to say something, yet the words remained trapped. Instead, he offered her a small, almost apologetic smile before reaching for her hand. She let him take it, their fingers intertwining for a fleeting moment, a silent acknowledgement of the bond they had created and the danger it carried. Then he left, closing the door gently behind him, leaving her alone with a heart that beat too fast for a woman who should have been asleep beside her husband. The next morning she moved through the house as though nothing had happened, but every corner whispered reminders of the night before. The kitchen table where they had sat, the hallway where he had leaned too close, the chair pushed back just slightly further than usual. She tried to busy herself, scrubbing counters and folding laundry, but nothing could erase the memory. Her husband called to say his meetings were extended, that he wouldn't be home for another day, and she caught herself feeling relief instead of disappointment. The realization twisted something inside her. Later, when she stepped outside to water her plants, she saw him across the street. Their eyes met, and though neither of them moved closer, the current passed between them again, silent but undeniable. She looked away quickly, cheeks burning with a mixture of shame and longing. She told herself it had been a mistake, a moment of weakness, something that must never happen again. Yet her body betrayed her, her heart aching at the distance, her mind replaying every detail she swore she wanted to forget. When her husband finally returned, she greeted him as though nothing had changed. She kissed his cheek, listened to his stories of long hours and endless meetings, nodded at the right places, smiled when expected. But beneath her calm exterior, she carried a secret that pulsed like fire in her veins. Every word she spoke to him felt layered, every glance a reminder of the betrayal she had hidden. He noticed nothing, or perhaps he chose not to, lost in his own routines and distractions. That night, lying beside him, she stared into the darkness, her thoughts drifting across the street. She remembered the warmth of another embrace, the way her neighbor's voice softened when he said her name. She knew this was only the beginning, that what had started as innocent conversations had unraveled into something far more dangerous. And as she closed her eyes, her hand tightening against the sheets, she wondered not if it would happen again, but when.